Hey, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving. Hope everybody had a great weekend. This is a special pleasure for me that I always look forward to, which is huddling up with Simon Rosenberg. And let me just say up front, if you don't subscribe to Hopium, his Substack, you should stop whatever else you're doing in your life and add meaning to it by subscribing to Hopium. There's so much out there that we all have to go through sort of a triage of what is really worth reading. And I have a short list, and Hopium is at the top. And one of the things that I enjoy and appreciate about Hopium is that I never really know what Simon's going to write. And I say that as someone who, in the past, when I've had a column for various publications, I realized I had about a month of columns in me. And after that, they were all going to be repeats of what went before. But Simon really brings a depth of experience. And also, I think he understands the gravity of the moment better than most. So, Simon, thank you, brother, for joining us.
Stuart, it's great to be with you. And I really look forward to our monthly chats. It's always a great place to air things out and back right at you. I mean, I've enjoyed, your commentary has been very important to me. And particularly, can I just raise this last piece that you just did about the Republican Party in Russia? Do you want to just spend a few minutes reflecting on that? Because you're in Alaska now, right? You're not too far away from,
I'm in Alaska and I can see Russia. Sarah Palin was right. I just don't understand why we don't talk about this more, Simon. What do we know? We know that the Russians wanted to elect Donald Trump in 2016. I mean, Marco Rubio's Senate Intelligence Committee came to that conclusion. We know that he won. We can argue about whether or not he would have won or not won without the Russian help, because causality is always, as you know better than anybody, the hardest thing to argue in politics. Yeah. We know that they wanted him to win, and he won. So what did he get? More than you could imagine. And you know what? I just sort of step back from this, and because Republican senators, I would say 80% do not agree with Trump's position on Ukraine, which is really the Putin position. And we know now that the Trump administration is actively working with the Russians to undermine Ukrainians. We saw that from that leaked phone call with Witkoff. And yet Republican senators do nothing. So in a classic sense, if you are going along, Trump is compromised and is not putting America's interests first. I don't think anybody could argue with that. If you go along with that, you are compromised. And the history of double agents and all of this from Ken Philby on, there's always a group of people who aid and abet Ken Philby's of the world. But they think that they're doing it for good reasons. They don't understand what Kim Philby is doing. This is much worse, because these Republican senators know what Donald Trump is doing, and yet they still won't speak up. I call this piece "None Dare Call It Treason" from the old quote, "None dare call it treason," because if everyone's doing it, it's not treason. So it brings to a larger point, I think, and that you raised, Simon, and have talked about before, and that is, how are we going to hold this wide spectrum of illegality and criminal behavior? How are we going to hold these people accountable? What structure is there going to be to do that? And will there be a stomach to do it, for lack of a better word?
I think, Stuart, I think about this all the time. And I think about the lack of a stomach to really pursue Trump, adequately after 2021 and his attempt to overturn an American election in 2021 and, try to violently assault members of Congress. and led that effort, and that there was no, all the efforts to create accountability around that failed. And I think that it's why, it's why I think it's so critical now for Democrats to be operating, as I say, with three legs to the stool. We have to be talking about affordability and prices, and we have to be talking about healthcare. But then these basket of issues around his abandonment of our democracy and democracies all around the world, the unprecedented levels of corruption that we're seeing, his selling of pardons, the building, the tearing down of the East Wing to build himself a gilded ballroom that keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. He may have to tear down the rest of the White House to build the ballroom at the current rate that he's going. That we have to develop a very robust, big conversation with the American people about what he's doing to the country and to all of us, because in order to create the predicate for accountability, and that our not engaging in this and our believing that we need to stay disciplined, I call it the tyranny of kitchen table issues, is preventing us from having a conversation, by the way, the American people want us to have. I mean, I've been able to show through my writing that threats to democracy in many polls are equal to or even greater than concerns about healthcare, for example. And it's certainly an issue top of mind to people, as it should be, right? Because, I mean, they're trampling our rights and freedoms in unprecedented ways. And so I think that we have an obligation as leaders of the country to be having this very robust conversation with the American people about these basket of issues that we can throw into the threats of democracy, including him selling out Ukraine and Europe and, frankly, even America to Russia. I mean, it certainly looks like what precipitated the last few weeks was that Russia just kind of upped the ante and how much money, the Americans were going to be, Jared Kushner and Witkoff and Trump. Remember, Witkoff's son runs World Liberty, right? They're huge corrupt crypto play. And so the Witkoff family and the Trump family are in business together. And part of that business extends to them shaking down the Ukrainians and in the current negotiations. And the level of betrayal that this represents of America, of democracy, of our Western alliances, of the world that we built after World War II, it's so overwhelming and jaw-dropping and dangerous and scary that, and I will just say one other thing, Stuart, is that I think, so part of it is, to answer your question, we need to be operating in a far more aggressive posture now in general, because, as you know, they are weakened. His powers are ebbing. They are wildly unpopular. They got their ass kicked in the November elections. As you know, we won in places by 20 points. Mike Johnson's down in Tennessee defending a plus 22 Republican district right now. They're bleeding out all over the place. And I think that we now have an obligation to be more ambitious and creative and aggressive, the way, frankly, those 6 congressional Democrats were in that video that they made, which has created this enormous, it's offended the Trump regime so much. And so we need to be, because what we're learning is that when we contest and fight with him, we win and he loses. And therefore, we should be doing it more. Right? Yeah. The lesson of the last few months. 100%. And so I think that part of it is we have to continue to open up these additional fronts. I think the 6 congressional Democrats, who deserve an enormous amount of credit, opened up this whole front around his conduct of foreign policy and what he was doing in the Caribbean and the war and the illegitimacy of their actions. But we need to be continuing to pressure on all fronts. We can be talking about affordability and healthcare and really muscling up in defending America, our national security interests, because the bottom line on all this stuff that Trump is doing is that he's making us far less safe than we've been in generations, and that he's sacrificing our national security for coin and for plunder. And we cannot allow this to happen. And I think it's where, I want to continue to encourage our leaders to be far more ambitious in their opposition to him. Because again, what we're learning is that when we fight him, as we've done now in the elections, as we did in the shutdown, as we're seeing in Tennessee, right, as we're seeing with the 6 congressional Democrats who did the video, when we fight him, we can win because he is addled and old and weak and crazy and out of it. And so the lesson should be is that we have to keep fighting now with greater ambition as we go forward.
Yeah, I think just the scope of illegality is so extraordinary that there's a sort of numbing effect. And, I go back to 2015 when there was this robust debate about Trump releasing his income tax returns.
Right.
Think how far we've gone. Of course, he lied about that. Just as he lied about one of my favorite lies of the 16 campaign was when he said he was paying for his own campaign, and when you went to his campaign page, the largest section was a donate page button that you could donate, which was then recorded by the FEC. But he says this stuff, and we've gone from that to I don't think this leaked phone call with Witkoff. Yeah. I mean, the sleazy New York real estate crypto creep is negotiating the Western Alliance.
It's just unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. And a prosecutor would put that leaked phone call before a jury as first piece of evidence that this man is engaged in corruption and selling out American interests quite literally, selling out Western Alliance interests quite literally. That is illegal on all kinds of levels. Yeah. And the degree that the Trump family's involved in it. I mean, just think about it. The fate of the Middle East is supposed to be decided in part by who Ivanka Trump is sleeping with. Really? That's their qualifications? Jared Kushner slept his way to Henry Kissinger status.
I know.
It's crazy. And, if you put it in all of this, you could say, go to ICE. Kristi Noem's engaged in illegal behavior.
Yeah.
Stephen Miller is engaged in illegal behavior. These ICE agents, many of them are engaged in illegal behavior. You go to the whole Doge, whatever. That was breathtaking illegality.
Oh my God. I mean, I think Elon Musk broke more laws in 6 months than any American in the history of the country,
And you have this other South African creep, David Sachs, who is like the White House technology guy or something, I mean, Sachs is the guy who wrote a book with Peter Thiel called The Diversity Myth, in which they compared campus rape, women coming out that they were raped on campus. They called it belated regret. That's the sort of person that David Sachs is. And I don't know. I suppose, I mean, let's just ask this question. So Democrats take the House. There are processes that can begin to hold this accountability just by holding the House, right? You don't need the Senate and the White House to do it. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I think there are a couple of things, Stuart. Is that one thing that I've been advocating for months that I think it now really needs to happen is we need to be making criminal referrals to the Department of Justice, recognizing that they won't be acted upon. But we need to document and to go on record. So the people, this is part of what these 6 Democrats, the 2 senators and the 4 House members did by raising the question in the Pentagon about whether people were about to go break the law. It's very clear based on the reaction of the regime that this has caused them a lot of problems with executing whatever they were going to do in Venezuela. Mm-hmm. And because they've been squawking so much, it's been painful to them. They've been squealing like a stuck pig. And so because what they did is they reminded people that rule of law in America still exists. It may not exist in the White House, but in the rest of society, it still exists, and that there's possibility that they could get prosecuted. I think that we have to start making the issue of accountability salient now, not when we win the House back or someday in the future, right, there needs to be accountability. And part of that is criminal referrals that to the Department of Justice to go have a team of House and Senate members who are generating criminal referrals around all this activity that we see. Kristi Noem, shoving $225 million of media into her, an allied firm. It's just unbelievable, graft and grift, right? Every time anything happens, we have a criminal referral cannon, right? That's just shooting out criminal referrals to put the issue of criminality and law breaking and lawlessness into the discourse. Because I think this is an area where I think Democrats have utterly failed. We've done a lot right? We had a great election. Trump's approval ratings are way down, all that stuff. There's a lot that's gone well for us. But we haven't attached corruption, criminality to these activities. And it is critical. I'll give you an example, right? The tearing down of the East Wing was illegal. He broke the law in what he did. There were legal processes in place that Trump needed to follow. And now he's going through an equally illegal, process to build the ballroom. These are things that Democrats can be raising in our negotiations over the budget, for example. If you want 7 of our votes to pass whatever final budget comes up in December or January, we could start demanding things like any of your cabinet officials that have appear to have broken the law, they have to resign in order to get our votes. So Hegseth and Kristi Noem, and go down the list, right? Voigt, who is not a cabinet official but a senior advisor, we could attach conditions and say, if you want us to vote for the final budget, these people are going to have to step down, or have greater ambition in our engaging them directly in this kind of lawlessness and serial criminality that's happening. We've been far too timid, in my view, about pouncing on this stuff. And we need to do it because it hurts them. And because our job now is we have to weaken the regime. We have to weaken it, right? It's not just fighting over healthcare. We have to start disabling pieces of the regime itself and have him start losing staff that matter to him. We have to start doing everything we can to weaken the entire enterprise, not just fight in the traditional issue environment. And that's why I have been arguing, as you mentioned in this piece, that we need to make their corruption, their lawlessness, their betrayal of the country front and center in everything we do now. And I think we began with the 6 congressmen, 6 members of Congress, and also now this focus on Hegseth. But this is just one structural piece, and that we need to follow in order to put this stuff in front and center. And again, regardless of what some do to, measure ads and how they affect whatever in some black box in Brooklyn, right? Like, we have a fucking obligation as patriots to be talking to the American people about what Trump is doing to the country, and holding this stuff back has been, in my view, a little bit reckless by our leaders, to be honest, over the last few months. And now that it's here, we have to keep going, because I do think that Americans are horrified at Trump. They have lost faith in him. 2/3 of the country is basically turning on him. And in order to keep that momentum going, I think we have to really bring this stuff to light. And to your point, finally, Stuart, and I will admit, I'm a little bit emotional and angry today about all this, because the leaks of the Witkoff phone calls were so shocking. Yeah. They were so unbelievably shocking that we now know, that how just nakedly corrupt all this is, that they're literally selling out the West to enrich themselves. Yeah. And this should be front and center. This should be something Democrats are talking to the American people about, because not only is it wrong, it's also fucking dangerous. And they're putting this country at enormous risk. Does anybody believe that if Russia attacked the United States, that Donald Trump would be able to defend us any longer, given everything that's happened, that it's not clear where his loyalties really lie to all this? I mean, we are in a very endangered place in our national security. And those national security leaders who represent us in Congress, I think need to be working a little bit harder in order to bring this case to the American people. I want to shout out to the Six. I want to shout out to Adam Smith, who I think has been working his ass off. He's been all over television. But we need more from the national security leaders of the Democratic Party, I think, in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I mean, what is so just striking about this is they continually admit what they're doing. I mean, when Kristi Noem was asked, are you obeying court orders? Her answer was, from the judges that we like.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't work. I mean, that's basically what a narco-terrorist would say. No, I'm not going to obey the law because I don't like this judge. Don't approve of this judge. And there's something about it, the scope of it, I think, that sort of paralyzes our discussion. Like, where do you begin? And I think it goes to a framing that it is deeply, deeply corrupt and anti-American. And I think that the Hegseth stuff, the killing of those who can't defend themselves, which, my dad fought 3 years in the Navy in the South Pacific, and he would tell these horror stories about what the Japanese did. Machine gunning survivors of ships that have been downed. And these are war crimes. And I think that that's something that if you frame it that way, the public can grasp. But also, as you know from so many campaigns, self-enrichment and corruption is always a potent political argument.
Yep.
People hate it, the idea that they're using advantage. And that's what the Trump family, it's a large crime family, what the Witkoff family's doing now, is just straight up corruption. And I think it needs to be framed in that way too. And you're absolutely right. It's not just if Russia attacked the United States, which in a way they are attacking the United States.
They are.
By covert efforts. I mean, basically the Witkoff leak phone call is a continuation of a covert operation that helped elect Donald Trump.
Right.
But if there's an intrusion into part of a NATO country, are we going to recognize, Article 5 of the NATO treaty that one country will come to the defense of another? All countries are to the defense of one attack.
No fucking way.
No.
Right? No fucking way. I mean, NATO is essentially dissolved, right? Or at least our involvement in NATO is essentially dissolved. And I think, Stuart, let me just try to, for time purposes, let me try to say two things to what you just said. Number one is, I do think there's a through line through all of this, which is that they're for the oligarchs and we're for the people, right?
Yes.
And that, which deals with affordability, it deals with healthcare. There is a structure, a narrative structure to all of this, which is, I call it in Hopium language, it's more for me and less for all of you. Whatever the version, whatever the actual words are, they're for global oligarchy and we're for America and the American people, right? And that this is a place that we have to do better at creating this narrative frame instead of so tactically being so obsessed with healthcare, which is important, but it doesn't create a narrative frame. The second thing is that what I wrote today is that I think we need to make December a good month for American democracy and democracy all around the world. And I think there are three ways we can do it. We can win this Tennessee election this week where, our candidate amazingly has a fighting chance. And we know that because they're spending incredible amounts of money. Mike Johnson's campaigning down in a +22 district. Afton Bain is an incredible candidate. She joined us last week at Hopium. She's an inspiring, incredibly capable candidate. We need to try to win that race. We need to try to win the Miami mayor's race a week from Tuesday. That would also be a huge blow in the middle of MAGA country, where we have a candidate who can and should win if she gets the resources in the coming days. The second thing is we need to continue to do what we're talking about today to fight their agenda and to not allow them to go uncontested. But the third thing that I think is emerging as sort of a third strategic plank of our engagement is we have to degrade his advisors. We have to bring forward the criminality and the lawlessness of his advisors and make this part of our daily discourse with them, and not have it be something that we just don't have time to get to because we're so focused on healthcare affordability. We need to make it be that it's an entire team of people that are acting corruptly and lawlessly, and to reinforce that it's not just him, it's the entire regime itself. And Hegseth is really exposed. Trump also, in this Air Force One, ridiculousness yesterday where he said so many crazy things, he basically started the process of throwing Hegseth under the bus. So, it would be great if we can start exposing and creating, both accountability, as you pointed out earlier, but also to force them to defend the indefensible, defend the corruption and the graft of these guys, defend their lawlessness, their outrageous lawlessness, open up these additional fronts that they're having to now defend, because basically most of the senior advisors to him, Voight, Stephen Miller, Kristi Noem, Robert Kennedy, have doing things that are either lawless or malevolent. And we need to open up these additional fronts and make them, because I don't think if anyone in that government thinks that Trump is going to defend them and carry through with them and stand behind them, I don't know what movie they've been watching for the last 10 years, because he's going to throw any one of them under the bus in any moment. And so I do think that in this place, as you know, Stuart, in a campaign, when the other side is starting to stumble and fall, is when you have to hit them harder. And we need to make December a month where we're on offense 24/7, 365. That Gallup poll, Donald Trump dropped 11 points in 1 month in a prominent, serious, independent poll. You and I haven't seen stuff like that very often in our careers. And we need to be very aggressive now in prosecuting this case with the American people. The healthcare issue, which was central to our winning this fight over the shutdown with Republicans, has served its course in my view. It's got to be only a small piece of this broader narrative that we establish, and to really be fighting on multiple fronts when they're weakest. And I think that, and what it requires is us to continue to challenge our leaders to be acting with a degree of confidence and strength, ambition and courage that the moment requires.
Yeah. So, let me ask you, should there be an effort to put a framework around this? Just thinking, like in South Africa, they had the Truth and Reconciliation, with the Nuremberg trials. And we need some mechanism like that. And it seems to me that like smart people ought to put their heads together and try to come up with some name for that. What would it be? Because it's really unprecedented in American history. If you look at Watergate was nothing compared to this. Yeah. Nothing. And Whitewater, going back to Clinton, this is stuff that is quaint. Agnew taking $10,000 is nothing compared to this.
No, can we just put it in context? The Witkoff-Kushner selling out of Ukraine to Russia is, the next 100 largest scandals, bigger than the next 100 largest scandals combined in the gravity, right? Because it's not just about graft and enrichment. It's about ending the Western alliance that's been, that we've been involved in for the last 80 years and selling out the entire American-led global order. What we are witnessing is a level of treason, traitorous behavior, whatever words are that you want to use, that is, to your point, hard to even put into words, the scale and scope of all this. And I I will tell you, the House Democrats have an initial thing they've established that becomes sort of the early stage of what you're describing, Stuart, which is they have this group that they call the Litigation and Something Task Force, right? Which has been so far to this point mostly generating amicus briefs in legal cases that they wanted the entire Democratic caucus to sort of get behind, including the current tariff, thing that's in front of the Supreme Court. That group, which is led by Congressman Neguse from Colorado and Jamie Raskin's involved and others, that has to get muscled up, right? Like that's a thing that needs now funding and staff and to have greater ambition to do things like these DOJ referral letters. I also think we should acknowledge that Robert Garcia, the head of the ranking member of the House the House Oversight Committee, who through his creativity and his incredible capacity was able to get that subpoena issued in July, which loosened up all those Epstein emails so that we now know that Epstein himself directly implicated Donald Trump in all of his activities, right? It wasn't something that was asserted any longer. It was Epstein from the grave speaking to us. Robert Garcia has emerged as a really capable and powerful and important leader, creating another piece of what you're describing, Stuart, because I don't exactly know how it's going to get constructed, but you see some of the foundational pieces to be in place that could be brought into something far more ambitious. It would be nice if the Senate, for example, started matching them in this kind of organizational structure that's already being put into place in the House.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we were good at on the Republican side was labeling and framing things.
Yep.
I don't think that you can support Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, and call yourself a patriot. And I think those are the sort of words matter. And I think that's the sort of language that needs to be used. And you go, Roger Wicker, you're chairman of the Armed Services Committee, you ushered in Hegseth. That's not the act of a patriot. You can't say that put America's interest at heart. You can't. I mean, it's completely indefensible. You cannot say out of 317 million Americans, we ended up with Pete Hegseth. The town's wrong. They run the largest military, the most by far that the world has ever seen. And the same with Kash Patel. It's not, what? Kash Patel? I mean, this is ludicrous stuff.
Who's, by the way, using SWAT teams to protect his 26-year-old girlfriend, travel with her. He's not using just normal, security forces in the government, Secret Service or FBI, the protectorate. He's using SWAT teams to taking them away from their legitimate activities to protect his 20s, not even his wife, right? Like not a kin, his current girlfriend who lives in Philadelphia or wherever she lives. It's just, these are things that are so beyond, somebody wrote the other day, and I wish I could give them credit, is that they're acting as if law does not even exist.
Yeah, that is their belief, because Trump will pardon everyone who breaks the law. That's what they absolutely think. And that's why Trump does it. That I am the person that you have to please, not the legal structure of American society. It's his sense of right or wrong, which is completely based on loyalty.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's this weird thing. You have Kash Patel, and then you have Kristi Noem, who's traveling around the world with, Corey Lewandowski, her boyfriend, that the United States is paying for. Just hired bought two new jets for Kristi Noem to fly around with her boyfriend. It's just weird, creepy, sleazy stuff. And you know what? It just really just mystifies me about, in the 2000 Bush campaign, I was there. It's a little bit of an exaggeration to say that the only thing that we did that worked was this theme of restoring honor and dignity to the White House, but it's not much of an exaggeration. And when we would run an ad that says that, the way it would move numbers versus like we run a tax ad or something, like, do nothing. And that was after Clinton, after Bill Clinton, which is say what you will, it's very hard to say that Bill Clinton wasn't a successful president. One of the major topics of debate in the 2000 presidential debates was what to do with the surplus.
Right.
Like you go back.
Do you know that GDP growth averaged 4%?
Yeah.
For all 8 years of Clinton's presidency, yeah. Right? Yeah. I mean, Bush inherited an economy that had been booming, and we had gotten, I was part of all this.
Wrong. Republicans were wrong. Remember, you go back to when Clinton raised taxes in 93 and it cost in 94, we all predicted it would, and I must have made a million ads about this, that it was going to kill, we called it Kevorkian tax rate increase because it was going to kill the economy. Yeah, well, that didn't happen. It was part of unleashing the largest post-World War II boom that we've experienced. And that's one of the things that, it's sort of a diversion, but that, the inability to admit that you were wrong is not an admirable trait. And I think that in the Republican Party, we need to go through this process of admitting we were wrong. We were wrong about the Laffer curve. It was not exist. It's George Bush in 1980 when he called Reagan's plan voodoo economics was right. We were wrong that we're wrong about Iraq. One of the great tragedies. We should do that. Just as we've been wrong about the inability of the party to expand its base to non-white voters. And I think that that's a critical step to go through. And, I don't know what it means to be an American conservative now. What are you for?
Yeah.
I don't.
There isn't really a conservative party. That's one of the most interesting things about our political system is that essentially one of the two political parties was captured by this very far right movement,
extremist
movement, and they are living off the historic brand of the Republican Party. When it's why I don't use the term conservative, because there's nothing conservative about what they're doing. We don't really have a great name for all of this either. I've been calling it recently Trumpism is the sort of word I've settled on, because I don't think it's purely fascism, and it's not neo-royalism is another term that I've seen, or the sort of, or pure oligarchy. It's its own unique stew of all of these things, right, that are specific to America at this time. And we have, I think that every time I use a word like fascist or oligarchical, I feel that it's incomplete, that it doesn't adequately capture really the dynamic of what's going on here. And I think, Stuart, going back to something you said earlier, vocabulary matters. There's this meme in the Democratic family about, Democrats only write sternly worded letters. But the Declaration of Independence was a sternly worded letter. And, you have to start with language and to help people orient and understand what's happening. And your point you made earlier, I think, is a very important one, which is that we're still grasping at basic vocabulary to describe what we're witnessing with our own eyes, in part because English as a language that has been the English-speaking people of the UK, of England and the United States have been remarkably well governed for a long time. And that we don't have, these sort of Bond villain like, figures that we're now dealing with. And I think that we're feeling the limits of our political language right now and our vocabulary.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
To describe it. And that's why when I come back to, it's like, they're for the oligarchs and, we're for the people. And we're going to, Stuart, we need to start wordsmithing and playing around. There needs to be consciousness that we're still in too far of a tactical place, rhetorically and in our narrative setting about what's happened. And it's why when I describe his agenda, I have all these little phrases because I write every day. And what's great about Hopium is that it's like a sketch pad. I mean, I try stuff out all the time, and sometimes things work and sometimes they don't. But the way I describe his agenda is that it's sabotage, plunder, and betrayal, right? That's the Trumpian agenda, and that it seems so improbable that we're even saying these things about this country. So I do think that you have a very important insight here, which is that we still haven't been able to tell the full story adequately to the American people. Although what's interesting is that they're figuring it out on their own, and that they're very, the line I have is that, people are pissed and we have to keep fighting. People are pissed about what's happening to the country and to them. I think the ballroom was an important moment of just like, you got to be shitting me, right? Like, come on, dude. Like, you're building yourself, you're cutting our healthcare and you're building yourself a gilded ballroom. I mean, and so I think that Trump has gone too far. He's pushed too many things. And let's just go through this very quickly to wrap. Let's talk about the rebukes that have happened, because I think this is really important to remind ourselves as we go forward, is that, there was the Senate voted 3 times to repeal his tariffs in mid-October. Then you had the election rebuke, which was, us winning by 20 plus points in California and in Maine and Georgia and in Pennsylvania, and these huge wins that Spanberger and Sherrill had. Stuart, that election, our performance was at the upper end of what was possible in that election. To win statewide races by 20 plus points, it never happens, right? And we saw it happen in 4 states. Yeah, right. I mean, it's like, oh my God, right?
And I've worked for Republicans who got elected in both those states. So.
Right, no, it's incredible, right? And then third is that we had the rebuke, the Epstein rebuke, which was basically the entire Congress rebuking a sitting president. It may be the most significant legislative loss by a sitting president in all of American history, because he had the entire Congress, all of it, voting against them. And what were they voting on? They wanted him to release these files about crimes committed, criminal activity, sex trafficking, all this stuff, which, by the way, he still hasn't done. The subpoena went to them in July. They still haven't released the documents from the congressional subpoena in July. The Congress voted on this a few weeks ago. Extraordinary rebuke that happened. What's happening in Tennessee is a rebuke. What's going to happen in Miami may be a rebuke. But we've also now seen Roger Wicker, your buddy, and we've now seen the House and Senate Armed Services Committee in a bipartisan way are moving forward with formal investigations into what Hegseth has been doing in the Caribbean. It's very important because it may forestall the ability for Trump to execute an invasion of Venezuela. So there is great urgency to this. And that's also an implicit rebuke. You saw in the House, 2 House Republicans have announced a discharge petition to release the Russian sanctions that has, by the way, 85 co-sponsors in the Senate. That Thune has tabled for the last 6 months because Trump kept promising him, to take concrete action against the Russians. And so Marjorie Taylor Greene has now rebuked Donald Trump in a very powerful way. We're seeing greater ambition and courage step from Republicans, which is this thing that we desperately need. And we should be encouraging that, calling congressional offices, encouraging them to push these kind of probes forward. We need there to be some kind of structural formal break of a handful. And it may not be the same senators and the same House members on every issue. It may be some House members break on healthcare and other House members break on Russia and others break on, but we have this discharge petition process where, we could conceivably see other things after Epstein, break where Mike Johnson loses complete control of the House. Imagine if 3 House Republicans all simultaneously announced their immediate resignation in protest of Johnson's speakership and Trump. That would turn the House over to Hakeem Jeffries, right? He would become speaker at that point. So we have to keep the pressure on because their thing is cracking. They're losing control. They all know that Trump is old and addled and in ill health. The MRI thing in the last couple of days has been, I described it as a Monty Python skit yesterday that Donald Trump did on Air Force One. But everyone, I guess, to close my piece of this, Stuart, and I'll let you have the final word, is that, we should be hardened. We should be angry beyond words for what Donald Trump has done to all of us. However, the American people have turned on him. The elections went really well. There's now public serial rebukes happening of him from Republicans. They're breaking from him. He is clearly losing, his powers are ebbing. And what it means is, and you know this, because campaign people understand this when we talk about this, when the other side is stumbling is when you have to hit them the hardest. And there is enormous now responsibility of our leaders and our family and the community to not take December off. These next few weeks are really going to matter. We need to be full in every day, fighting as hard as we can, winning these elections, calling our members in Congress, info-warring, as we call it, and continuing to do what's required, which is to mitigate the damage that he's doing, to advance our agenda and to win back power. And I think we have an enormous opportunity. And I just want to close by saying, congratulations, everybody. I mean, it's been bad. I'm not going to sugarcoat any of this, but we're also politically further along in some ways in the traditional understanding of power and politics and elections than I would have assumed at this point. And that's also, we can keep both of those things in our mind at the same time, that he's doing enormous harm to the country, but also that our movement has probably been far more successful than I would have imagined at this point, 6 months ago.
Well, listen, man, let's end it there. It's so important, because I think, one of the constants of autocrats is to try to convince the public that it is impossible, that what they're doing is inevitable, that you can't fight it, you will fail. So focus on just your life, little things, go to football games, go to Thanksgiving, but don't worry about, this other stuff is just way too much. And that is to surrender, and we can't do that. So look, let me just say again to everybody, please go and subscribe to Hopium on Substack. Subscribe to Lincoln Square. We have to fight this stuff. I mean, we have these appalling moments with traditional media in this country. Jeff Bezos, who's just turned into such an odd, weird, middle-aged crisis guy. Barry Weiss at CBS, which is just such an absurdity. And we have to save ourselves. So thank to everybody listening to this, and thank you, Simon, and look forward to talking again soon.
Stuart, thank you for your leadership, and thanks for helping have built Lincoln Square into a powerful, part of this new family that we have. And also thank you for your commentary about Russia and the Republican Party. To me, this remains kind of this thing that is still a topic that we can't really talk about. And it may be the single most important thing in the country. And so you've done an amazing job at continuing to articulate all that. And I'm just grateful for your ongoing leadership in that regard.
Okay.
See you, everybody. Take care.